She wasn't supposed to find him. Sky Evans, disgraced financial genius, 7 months pregnant, 1 warrant and 2 pawn shops away from rock bottom, was hunting for discarded phones in the financial district trash when she stumbled on a bleeding man in a suit that cost more than her remaining net worth. He was dying. He had a briefcase. And when his eyes met hers, desperate, calculating, already weighing her value, she recognized the look because she'd worn it herself for the last 18 months. The look of someone who'd do anything to survive. I pray that everyone who watches this video, subscribes, and leaves a comment will receive the very thing their heart has been searching for, whether it's peace, clarity, healing, or a breakthrough they've been waiting on. May unexpected blessings find you, may your silent prayers be answered, and may goodness follow you wherever you go. Please don't forget to drop a comment and tell me how this story made you feel. Your words encourage me more than you could ever imagine. The August humidity had turned the alley into a suffocating tunnel of rot and desperation. The kind of heat that made dumpster trash smell like a physical barrier and turned Sky Evans's second-hand maternity dress into a sweat-soaked prison. She shifted her weight, her swollen feet screaming in canvas sneakers held together with duct tape, and stared at the recycling bin she'd been picking through. Her phone's flashlight beam caught the metallic edge of something. Maybe a discarded smartphone, maybe just aluminum foil, but it didn't matter now, because the man bleeding out 6 feet away had just changed everything. Sky had been on the streets since 9 p.m., methodically working her way through the financial district's commercial trash before the morning pickup crews arrived. She'd been the ghost of Wall Street 18 months ago, the financial architect who'd designed offshore shell structures so elegant they'd been called art. Now she was a disgraced analyst with an active warrant for low-level fraud, 7 months pregnant, and digging through garbage for anything she could pawn. The fall had been absolute. Her back ached from the pregnancy weight. Her last meal had been a convenience store sandwich she'd split into 3 portions, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The baby kicked against her ribs, a reminder that her body was building a human being out of nothing but stress hormones and expired yogurt. The pawn shop on 5th would give her maybe $40 for a working phone. $60 if it was new enough. That meant 3 more days of food, 3 more days of the storage unit rental where she kept her laptop and the last remnants of her old life. 3 more days before she'd have to make a choice she wasn't ready to make. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Not her personal phone, the burner she used for the consulting work. Anonymous jobs posted on dark web forums. Financial analysis for people who didn't ask questions and didn't want to be traced. The message was simple. $500. Verify account routing. 30 minutes. No contact after. Sky's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to hope. $500 meant a week of food, a prenatal vitamin bottle, maybe even a used crib from the Goodwill. It meant her storage unit wouldn't be auctioned off before she figured out her next move. She could ignore the routing request, it was probably money laundering, possibly worse. She'd ignored plenty of offers in the last 6 months, trying to maintain whatever ethical line she had left. But $500. She pocketed the phone and turned toward the alley exit. That's when she saw the briefcase. Heavy, metallic, lying 3 feet from the bleeding man's outstretched hand. The kind of case that didn't hold lunch, the kind that held something worth dying for. The man's lips moved. No sound emerged, but Sky read the shape. Help. Every rational instinct screamed at her to run. Pregnant women didn't get involved with men in $1,000 suits bleeding out in alleys. They didn't touch mysterious briefcases. They definitely didn't make eye contact with someone whose wounds looked professionally inflicted, small caliber, center mass, the kind of shooting that said execution rather than robbery gone wrong. But Sky Evans had stopped being rational the day she'd realized she was pregnant and alone and unemployable. She pulled out her burner phone and scrolled through her pathetically short contact list. One name, Ethan Riley, the veteran who rented the garage bay next to her storage unit. The man who'd helped her carry boxes exactly once and had barely spoken 10 words to her in 3 months. The man who she knew, because she'd watched him through the gap in the corrugated metal wall, had combat medical training and a duffel bag full of military-grade first aid supplies. She pressed call. Riley, it's Evans from Unit 23B. She paused, watching the man's chest rise and fall in increasingly shallow breaths. Blood was pooling faster now, spreading across the concrete in a dark mirror. I need you to bring your medical kit, now, and don't ask questions. Hook variations, different tones. Ethan Riley arrived in 4 minutes flat, his rusted Ford van rolling to a stop with the engine still running. He emerged like a shadow given form, 6'2", whipcord lean, moving with the kind of economy that came from years of making every motion count. His duffel bag hit the ground before he did, and his eyes swept the alley in a practiced arc. Exits, cover points, threat assessment. When his gaze finally landed on Adrian, something in his posture shifted. Not softer, sharper. Gunshot, abdominal. How long? His voice was flat, professional, already kneeling beside the bleeding man. 10 minutes, maybe 12. Skye pressed herself against the alley wall, giving him space. He's been conscious the whole time. Ethan's hands moved with surgical precision, cutting away the ruined suit jacket, exposing the entry wound high on Adrian's right side. No exit wound. The bullet was still inside. His fingers probed the edges, gentle, methodical, while his other hand found the pulse point at Adrian's throat. Pressure's dropping, breathing's shallow, needs a hospital. No hospital. Adrian's voice was barely a rasp, but the command in it was absolute. His hand shot out, gripping Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. No, police. Ethan didn't flinch. Then you die here. I die there. Adrian's eyes blazed with a clarity that contradicted his failing body. They're waiting. Skye watched Ethan process this, saw the veteran's jaw tighten as he made a calculation she recognized. The kind where every option was bad. And you picked the one that let you sleep at night. He pulled a field trauma kit from the duffel, Israeli bandages, quick clot, IV supplies, and began laying them out with the same mechanical precision. Talk to me, Ethan said, more to himself than anyone else. Stay conscious. What's your name? Adrian. The man's breathing was getting worse, each inhale a wet, rattling gasp. Adrian. Park. That's when it happened. The sound of Adrian's breathing, that specific drowning quality, triggered something in Ethan that Skye saw ripple across his body like a shockwave. His hands froze mid-motion, hovering over the quick clot packet. His eyes went distant, unfocused. His breathing pattern changed, matching Adrian's panicked rhythm. Riley? Skye pushed off the wall. Ethan? He was gone. Still physically present, but mentally somewhere else, somewhere with sand and heat and the same wet breathing that meant a friend was dying in your arms. His hands began to shake. The quick clot packet fell into the pooling blood. Shit. Skye dropped to her knees beside Adrian, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and painful. She grabbed the packet, ripped it open with her teeth. Riley. Ethan. Look at me. He didn't. His whole body had gone rigid, locked in whatever nightmare had him. Adrian's eyes found hers. Even dying, she saw the calculation there, the realization that his life now depended on a pregnant woman and a broken veteran. You... medical? Financial analyst. Skye pressed the hemostatic agent against the wound, her hands slick with blood. But I remember enough anatomy to know you're bleeding into your liver, and we have maybe 20 minutes before you go into shock. She turned to Ethan, whose breathing had escalated into something close to hyperventilation. Riley, I need you to hear my voice. You're in Chicago. It's August. You're in an alley, and I'm 7 months pregnant, which means I can't lift this man alone. I need you functional. Nothing. His eyes were still somewhere else. Skye made a choice. She reached out and grabbed Ethan's face, forcing him to look at her. You owe me $60 for the storage unit while you put a hole in last month. You owe me an explanation for why you have morphine and combat gauze in that bag. And you owe this man about 15 more minutes of not dying. So come back. Now. Something in her voice, the authority, the desperation, or maybe just the absurdity of a pregnant woman covered in someone else's blood, cut through. Ethan's eyes focused, found hers. His breathing slowed. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. I'm here." "Good. Because we're moving him. Your van. Your garage. And you're going to do exactly what I tell you." They got Adrian into the van in 90 seconds, Sky directing, Ethan lifting, Adrian biting back screams that came out as strangled gasps. The briefcase came too, though Sky didn't have time to think about what it contained. They were pulling out of the alley when she saw it in the side mirror. A black sedan, windows tinted, rolling slowly past the alley entrance. "Hunting. Drive," Sky said quietly. "Don't speed. Don't run lights. Just drive." Ethan's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, but they were steady. In the back, Adrian had passed out, his breathing barely audible over the engine, and Sky realized, with a clarity that felt like drowning, that she'd just made a choice there was no walking back from. Ethan's garage bay looked like a place designed for forgetting, concrete floor stained with decades of oil. A single fluorescent tube flickering overhead, industrial shelving units holding nothing but dust and a few rusted tools. The air smelled like metal and abandonment, but it had a solid door, no windows, and enough space to lay Adrian out on the tarp Ethan spread across the floor with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this before. "Elevate his legs," Sky said, already positioning herself at Adrian's side. "Shock protocol, and I need that morphine." Ethan moved without question now. His earlier paralysis burned away by the immediate demands of crisis management. He handed her the syringe, watched as she administered it with the confidence of someone who'd studied this in textbooks but never imagined doing it 7 months pregnant on a garage floor. "The bullet's still inside," Ethan said, his voice steady but tight. "Liver region. If we don't get it out, we can't get it out, not here." Sky pressed fresh gauze against the wound, applying pressure. "We stabilize, we stop the bleeding, we keep him alive long enough to figure out what the hell we're dealing with." She talked Ethan through it like she was reading from a manual she'd memorized years ago. Wound irrigation, pressure bandaging, IV line placement. Her hands were steady even as her mind cataloged everything that could go wrong: infection, internal bleeding, organ failure. Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness, his face gray in the harsh fluorescent light. It was only when his breathing finally evened out, when the immediate crisis had passed, that Sky turned her attention to the briefcase. It sat against the garage wall where Ethan had dropped it, metallic and incongruous among the rust and decay. Heavy duty. The kind of case that survived falls and fires. Sky's fingers found the latches, unlocked, which surprised her, and opened it. No cash, no drugs, no weapons. Instead, file folders. Dozens of them, organized with meticulous precision. Bank statements from institutions she recognized: Cayman Islands, Singapore, Luxembourg, routing numbers, account structures, shell company registries, and beneath it all, secured in a foam cutout, a sealed external hard drive with a biometric lock glowing faint blue. Sky's breath caught. She knew this architecture, had designed systems like it. These weren't just financial records. This was a complete map of an organization's money, every stream, every tributary, every hidden reservoir, years of transactions, billions probably. "Jesus," she whispered. "Not Jesus." Adrian's voice made her jump. His eyes were open, focused on her with an intensity that shouldn't have been possible given the morphine. "Sokdo, my syndicate." Sky held up one of the folders. "This is a complete financial audit trail, money laundering, offshore structures, and this," she touched the hard drive, "this is encrypted at a level that requires government-grade resources to crack. What the hell is on here?" Adrian's hand moved, weak, reaching for the case. "Proof, foreign collaboration, treason, my second-in-command, Jay. He wants to sell it. Take control." Each word cost him. "Ambushed me. Professional. Internal hit." Ethan, who'd been cleaning his equipment with methodical focus, went still. Internal means they know your protocols, your safe houses, your people. All of them. Adrian's eyes closed briefly. Except this place. I never logged this address, never told anyone about. He gestured vaguely at Sky, at Ethan. You. Sky felt something cold settle in her chest. So we're not just hiding you. We're hiding evidence that could destroy an entire criminal organization. Or save it. Adrian's gaze locked on hers. Depends who controls the data. That's when Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then pulled out a device Sky didn't recognize, some kind of RF scanner. He began walking the perimeter of the garage, watching the readings. When he reached Adrian's discarded suit jacket, the scanner shrieked. We've got a problem! Ethan pulled a small object from the jacket's cufflink, smaller than a dime, blinking red. Active tracker, military grade. It's been pinging this location for the last 20 minutes. The garage went silent except for the flicker of the fluorescent tube. Sky looked at Adrian, then at Ethan, then at the briefcase full of evidence that men were willing to kill for. Her mind raced through scenarios, calculations, risk assessments. The same analytical process that had made her the ghost of Wall Street now applied to a completely different kind of problem. How long do we have? She asked. Ethan checked his watch. If they're competent, they're already on their way. 10 minutes. Maybe less. Adrian pushed himself up on one elbow, his face twisted with pain. Leave me. Take the drive. You can… Shut up. Sky grabbed the briefcase, snapped it closed. Riley, can you move him? If I have to. You have to. She looked at both men, saw the future narrowing to a single point. Because we're not leaving anyone behind, not him, not the evidence, and definitely not our only chance at surviving whatever's coming through that door. Ethan was already moving, gathering supplies. Where? Sky's mind flickered through options. Storage units, too obvious. Her old apartment, foreclosed. Public spaces, too exposed. Then she remembered something, an address from 18 months ago, before the fall. I know a place, she said, but we move now. Outside in the August darkness, headlights appeared at the far end of the industrial block. Hunting. The patrol car rolled past their hiding spot with agonizing slowness, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist like surgical blades. Sky pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the alley, Adrian's hand firm on her shoulder, holding her still. Ethan stood at the corner, his body a dark statue, one hand resting on something beneath his jacket that Sky tried not to think about. When the taillights finally disappeared around the corner, Adrian exhaled, a sound that might have been relief or calculation, Sky couldn't tell. Go, now. The Mercedes was parked 3 blocks away, deliberately distant, deliberately inconspicuous among the working-class sedans lining the street. Ethan drove with the kind of precision that made every turn, every lane change feel choreographed, but Sky could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never stopped moving between mirrors and windows and shadows. They wound through the city like water finding cracks, taking side streets and service alleys that Sky hadn't known existed. Once, Ethan pulled into an underground parking garage and killed the engine, and they sat in perfect silence for 7 minutes while another of Jay's cars prowled past the entrance above. Sky counted her heartbeats, 216 before Adrian's phone buzzed softly, and Ethan started the car again. The safe house was a violence of contradictions. 37th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sleeping city. Marble countertops and designer furniture that probably cost more than Sky's annual salary. She stood in the entrance, still wearing yesterday's clothes, now wrinkled and stained with alley grime, and felt the wrongness of it like a physical weight. Showers through there, Adrian said, shrugging out of his jacket. There was blood on his collar. Not his, Sky remembered with a lurch. I'll have Ethan bring clothes. I don't want your clothes. I want my money. The words came out harder than she'd intended, sharpened by exhaustion and fear, and the surreal disconnect of standing in a luxury apartment while men with guns hunted them through the streets below. Adrian turned to look at her, and for a moment something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or reassessment. The deal was information for payment, Sky continued, crossing her arms over her chest, over the life growing there that she was trying very hard not to think about right now. I gave you information, multiple pieces. I'm still waiting for the payment part. You're alive, Adrian said quietly. Under the circumstances, I'd say that's payment enough. That wasn't the deal. They stared at each other across the pristine living room, and Sky felt the weight of Ethan's presence somewhere behind her, watchful and still. Adrian moved first, walking to the windows, the city lights painting his profile in amber and shadow. Who are you really? He asked. And don't give me the research assistant story again. Research assistants don't move like you do. They don't think like you do. I'm someone who made a mistake getting involved in your world, Sky said. And I'm someone who needs to get out of it before… She stopped, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. Adrian saw it. Of course he saw it. Those calculating eyes missed nothing. Before, he prompted. Before my baby pays for my mistakes, she thought, but didn't say. Instead, before Jay finds us and finishes what he started. Across the city, in a penthouse that mirrored Adrian's in luxury and surpassed it in cold efficiency, Jay Park studied the photograph on his tablet. The woman from the warehouse, frozen in grainy security footage, her face clear enough, her profile telling. Confirmed? He asked. His lieutenant nodded. 3 months? Maybe 4. Medical records show her last appointment was… I don't care about appointments. Jay set down the tablet with precise gentleness. Adrian's protecting a pregnant woman. That's not business, that's personal. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made his lieutenant take an unconscious step backward. And personal weaknesses are so much easier to exploit. He pulled up a map of the city, the glowing screen reflecting in his dark eyes. Find her, he said softly. And when you do, make sure Adrian knows exactly what happens to people he tries to protect. The algorithm scrolled across the laptop screen, like a language only Sky could read, layers of encryption wrapped around financial data, each one more sophisticated than the last. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a rhythm that was almost meditative, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would be too slow. Adrian watched from across the room, coffee growing cold in his hand. He'd been watching for 40 minutes now, and something had been nagging at him, a recognition dancing just beyond reach. Then she did it, a particular sequence of keystrokes, a diagonal approach to a vertical problem that made his breath catch. Stop! Sky's hands froze above the keyboard. She didn't look up. That bypass method, Adrian said slowly, moving closer. The way you're tunneling through the encryption layers instead of breaking them. I've only seen one person work like that. Lots of people know advanced decryption. No. He set down his coffee, his voice sharpening. Not the technique, the signature, the algorithmic fingerprint. He was standing behind her now, close enough to see the code reflected in her eyes. Sky Evans is a ghost, a name that shows up on a few old university papers and then vanishes. But you… He reached past her, pointing at a string of code. You're her. The ghost of Wall Street. The silence that followed was so complete that Sky could hear Ethan shift position in the hallway, could hear the distant hum of the building's ventilation. She closed the laptop slowly, carefully, and finally turned to face him. That's not who I am anymore. That's exactly who you are. Adrian pulled out the chair across from her, sitting down with the deliberate calm of someone who'd just found the missing piece of a puzzle. 3 years ago, the Meridian collapse, 16 billion in fraudulent derivatives, and you were the analyst who caught it. Except somehow you went from whistleblower to scapegoat, didn't you? Sky's laugh was bitter. Is that what they're calling it? Scapegoat sounds so much cleaner than what actually happened. Tell me. And maybe it was the exhaustion, or the pregnancy hormones, or the simple fact that she'd been carrying this weight alone for so long, but the words came spilling out. How she'd discovered the fraud buried in layers of legitimate trades, how she'd taken it to her superiors, believing in the system, in justice, how those same superiors had turned it around, painting her as the architect instead of the detective. They had better lawyers, she said, staring at her hands. Better connections, better everything. By the time the dust settled, I was unhireable, investigation pending, and carrying the child of a man who— She stopped, swallowed hard. A man who was part of the fraud, who I'd trusted, who used me. The father, Adrian said quietly, is one of them, one of the people who destroyed my life and walked away clean. Her hand moved to her stomach, a gesture that was becoming familiar. I found out I was pregnant 2 days after my name hit the financial press. 3 months later, I was doing data analysis for criminals because that was the only work I could get. Poetic, right? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his analytical mind reordering everything he thought he knew about the woman sitting across from him. Not a liability, not a witness to protect or a loose end to manage. An asset. Possibly the most valuable asset he'd stumbled across in years. The data on that drive, he said. You can break it. Eventually, it's complex, but you can understand it. Map the flow, trace the connections, turn it into something useful. He leaned forward and Sky saw the shift in his eyes, the predator recognizing prey. Something weaponizable. Weaponizable against Jay? Against everyone. Adrian's smile was cold and precise. You said they destroyed your life. The people who framed you, who used you, some of them are connected to this. Jay's syndicate has tendrils in legitimate finance. Cross-pollination of criminal and corporate money. He gestured to the laptop. That drive probably contains enough evidence to burn down half the financial district. Sky stared at him, feeling something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly. She'd lost the right to hope somewhere between the indictment and the pregnancy test. But purpose, maybe. Direction. You want to use me, she said. I want to partner with you, Adrian corrected. You break the encryption. We analyze the data together. Then we decide who burns and how. In the hallway, Ethan listened and said nothing, but his hand tightened fractionally on his weapon. The dynamics were changing, and changes meant variables, and variables meant risk. He'd protect them both, but he was beginning to wonder if protection was what they actually needed. The explosion that shattered the 37th floor windows came at 3:47 a.m., precisely timed to catch them in the vulnerable hours between sleep and waking. Sky was at the laptop, eyes burning from hours of code breaking. Adrian was reviewing financial statements on the couch. Ethan was the only one who moved before the glass started falling, already shouting, "Down!" as he crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed Sky to the floor, his body covering hers and the life she carried. The second explosion took out the front door. How many? Adrian was on his feet, blood running from a cut above his eye where flying glass had caught him. Ethan's response was clipped, professional. 6 minimum. 2-person breach team, 4 support, standard tactical formation. He was moving as he spoke, dragging furniture toward the hallway, creating angles and barriers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this in worse places with worse odds. They'll come fast, expecting us disoriented. The drive, Sky gasped, still on the floor, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach. I have it. Adrian grabbed the laptop, then pulled Sky to her feet with surprising gentleness. Ethan, kitchen, both of you, now. Ethan was at the hallway entrance, his weapon drawn, his entire demeanor transformed. This wasn't the quiet sentinel who'd driven them through the city. This was something else entirely, something carved from violence and survival. Sky stumbled toward the kitchen, but her analyst's mind was already working. The apartment blueprint. I saw it when we arrived. The ventilation system connects to the unit below, and there's a service access from the kitchen to the maintenance corridor. Ethan glanced at her, a flicker of something. Surprise? Respect? Crossing his face. Can you get to it? Yes, but you need to funnel them. Make them commit to the main approach. She was pulling up building schematics on Adrian's phone, her fingers shaking but precise. If they split formation, we're done. They won't split. Ethan was setting something up near the hallway. Sky tried not to look too closely. I'm better than they are, and they know it. Pride will make them come through the front. The first gunman came through the shattered doorway with military precision, and Ethan dropped him with 2 shots that sounded impossibly loud in the enclosed space. The second man dove for cover, but Ethan had already moved, using the furniture barricades like a 3-dimensional chessboard, always 2 steps ahead of where they expected him to be. Adrian watched him work with growing recognition, something tugging at his memory. The efficiency, yes, but more than that, the specific technique, the way Ethan cleared corners, the tattoo visible now on his forearm as his sleeve rode up during movement. A unit insignia. Specialized. Rare. And then Adrian remembered. 7 years ago. A desperate woman in his office, begging him to pay a debt her brother couldn't pay, offering anything, everything. Adrian had paid it. $140,000 to keep a soldier's sister out of a syndicate meat grinder. He'd never met the soldier. Never needed to. Until now. "Sarah Chen!" Adrian shouted over the gunfire, and watched Ethan's body go rigid for 1 fractional second. "Your sister. The debt. That was me." Ethan didn't respond, but something changed in the way he moved. Before, he'd been fighting with professional competence. Now he fought with something closer to fury, or perhaps devotion, the kind of debt that went beyond money, beyond employment, into the territory of honor and blood obligation. He took down 3 more men with brutal efficiency, and when the last one tried to flank through the demolished living room, Ethan was already there, his weapon trained with the steadiness of someone who'd made peace with violence a long time ago. "Clear," he said finally, his voice rough. 30 seconds to move." They ran. The service corridor was narrow and dark, smelling of industrial cleaning solution and old pipes. Sky led them down with the phone's blueprint as their guide, her breathing labored, 1 hand on the wall for support, the other clutching the laptop with the hard drive like a talisman. Behind them, the safe house was already burning, Ethan's final gift to their pursuers, a petroleum-based distraction that would buy them precious minutes. They emerged in a parking garage 2 buildings over, and Ethan had already identified their exit vehicle. A nondescript Honda that probably belonged to some middle manager who'd never know his car had been borrowed for a midnight escape. As Ethan hot-wired the ignition, Adrian looked at him across the dim interior. "Your sister, Sarah, she's safe," Ethan said quietly. "Because of you. That debt doesn't expire, Mr. Cross. Not ever." Sky, wedged in the back seat with the laptop, watched the 2 men and understood that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't employment anymore. This was something older, something that predated contracts and cryptocurrency payments. This was the kind of bond forged in fire and honor and shared survival. The kind of bond that might actually see them through whatever came next. The laundromat was open 24 hours, fluorescent lit and anonymous. The kind of place where nobody looked at anyone too closely because everyone had their own problems. Sky sat at a chipped formica table near the back, the laptop surrounded by a fortress of detergent bottles that Ethan had strategically positioned to block sight lines from the street-facing windows. Adrian nursed burns on his hands from the safe house fire. Ethan stood by the door, looking like exactly the kind of man who made other patrons decide their laundry could wait. The smell of industrial soap and fabric softener mixed with Sky's exhaustion into something almost hallucinogenic. She'd been staring at financial data for 6 hours straight, her back aching, her vision blurring, the baby doing something that felt like somersaults against her ribs. "Talk to me," Adrian said. He'd pulled a chair across from her, close enough that his voice wouldn't carry over the rumble of the dryers. "It's bigger than we thought." Sky turned the screen toward him, though she knew he wouldn't understand half of what he was seeing. Jay's not just running a criminal syndicate. He's operating a parallel banking system. Legitimate businesses feeding dirty money propping up legitimate investments. It's a closed loop, and it's... She paused, doing mental calculations. Conservatively, $2.3 billion in active circulation. Adrian's expression didn't change, but she saw his fingers tighten on the edge of the table. "Here's what I need to know," he said quietly. "Can you just break this open? Expose it? Or can you do something more?" Sky met his eyes, understanding the real question beneath the words, and I say. This wasn't about justice or exposure or bringing down a criminal empire through proper channels. This was about survival, about power, about making sure Jay Park couldn't hunt them anymore. "I can do more," she said. She worked for another 3 hours while Adrian watched and Ethan kept sentinel. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing confidence as the encryption yielded its secrets, revealing not just evidence of criminal activity, but access, account numbers, routing protocols, authentication codes that Jay's people had been stupid enough to store alongside their financial records. "Here's what you need to understand about modern financial systems," Skye said, her voice taking on a lecturing quality that probably came from her old life, her Wall Street life. "Money doesn't exist as physical currency anymore, it's data. And data can be manipulated." She pulled up a schematic that looked like a neural network, glowing lines connecting nodes across what Adrian realized was a map of the global financial system. Jay's money moves through 17 primary accounts, but they all funnel through 3 central nodes: Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. Traditional law enforcement would need months of warrants and international cooperation to freeze those assets. "But you don't need warrants," Adrian said, beginning to understand. "I need 15 minutes and a good internet connection." Skye's smile was sharp, predatory, the ghost of Wall Street remembering what she'd been before they'd tried to destroy her. "I'm going to reroute every transaction currently in process through a holding pattern that mimics standard anti-money laundering protocols. It'll look like routine compliance checks. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the accounts will be frozen at the source level." "For how long?" "Permanently, if I do it right. The AML flags will trigger automatic investigations. Even if Jay has the connections to eventually unfreeze them, he'll have to expose his entire network to do it." She was already typing, her exhaustion forgotten in the pure intellectual thrill of the strategy. "He'll be financially paralyzed within the hour." Adrian leaned back, watching her work with something approaching awe. "This is why they tried to destroy you. Not because you found the fraud, because you could do this." "I could always do this," Skye said without looking up. "I just used to think there were rules worth following." The execution was elegant in its simplicity, Skye tunneled through Jay's security protocols using his own authentication codes against him, planting algorithmic tripwires that would cascade through the system like dominoes. Adrian watched the numbers on the screen begin to change, transactions stalling, accounts entering suspended status, the vast machinery of Jay's financial empire grinding to a halt. When it was done, Skye closed the laptop with a finality that felt ceremonial. "You needed a shield," she said, meeting Adrian's eyes across the cheap Formica table in a 24-hour laundromat that smelled of bleach and desperation. "You got a sword." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, understanding shifting behind his eyes. Then he smiled, a real smile, not the calculating expression he usually wore like armor. "Partners," he said, extending his hand across the table. Skye looked at the offered hand, thinking about everything it represented. Not rescue anymore, not protection, true partnership, with all the power and danger that implied. She thought about her child, about the future she was building with every choice she made. Then she reached out and took Adrian's hand. "Partners," she agreed. From his position by the door, Ethan watched the exchange and allowed himself the smallest of nods. The dynamic had crystallized into something functional, something that might actually work. Adrian was the face, the connections, the underworld legitimacy. Skye was the mind, the strategy, the weapon that didn't need bullets. And Ethan was the shield for both of them. The debt to Adrian now expanded to include the woman who'd guided him through tactical decisions in the middle of a firefight, who was carrying new life while dismantling criminal empires from a laptop in a laundromat. It was the strangest team he'd ever been part of. It might also be the most dangerous. The conference room occupied the 62nd floor of a building that Adrian's organization technically didn't own, but effectively controlled. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's financial district, a vista of glass and steel and money that felt deliberately chosen for this moment. The remaining SOCDO council members sat around the obsidian table like judges at a trial, their faces carved from stone and suspicion. Skye stood beside Adrian's chair, her pregnancy visible now beneath the simple black dress that Ethan had somehow procured. She'd argued against coming, too dangerous, too exposed, but Adrian had insisted, and eventually she'd understood why. Her presence was a statement, a declaration that the old rules no longer applied. "Gentlemen," Adrian said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of organizational protocol, "we convene to address the matter of Park J's treason and the future governance of our operations." The eldest council member, a man named Chen, whose face suggested he'd seen empires rise and fall, leaned forward. "We convene to address your catastrophic failure of leadership, Adrian. You've exposed us to external threats, compromised operational security, and—" his eyes flickered to Sky with undisguised contempt. "Brought an outsider into our most sensitive proceedings." "The outsider has a name," Sky said quietly, and the room went silent. Women didn't speak in council meetings. Outsiders certainly didn't. "And the outsider is the reason your organization still exists." She moved to the head of the table, connecting her laptop to the projection system, with movements that were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The baby kicked, hard, and she pressed one hand briefly to her side before bringing up the first slide. "Park J has been systematically embezzling from organizational operations for 18 months. The screen filled with transaction records, routing numbers, account statements. He's funneled approximately $400 million into personal offshore accounts, using legitimate business fronts to launder the transfers." "Speculation," another council member, Kim, spat. "Fabricated evidence from a disgraced financial criminal." "It's not speculation when I have the account access codes," Sky replied, pulling up a live feed of one of Jay's Cayman accounts. "Would you like me to transfer the funds back to organizational control? Or should I route them to Interpol's Financial Crimes Division instead?" The silence that followed was profound. Sky continued, methodical and merciless. She showed them the foreign collaboration data, evidence that Jay had been selling operational intelligence to rival syndicates in Seoul and Taipei. She demonstrated how he'd compromised 3 separate smuggling routes. She presented communication logs that proved he'd ordered Adrian's assassination not for organizational benefit, but for personal advancement. "The evidence is irrefutable," she concluded. "Jay Park is a traitor, and I've frozen every asset he controls. Your organization is secure. You're welcome." Chen stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with the sound of finality. "You've proven your point about Park J, but you've also proven that you're too dangerous to remain alive. Both of you." He gestured, and Sky saw movement at the edges of the room, guards stepping forward. "This woman has access to everything. She's seen our faces, knows our operations, holds our financial data. The only acceptable loose end is a dead one." Kim nodded agreement. "And Adrian, you've violated every protocol we have, bringing an outsider to council, prioritizing personal loyalty over organizational security. You're unfit to lead." The third council member, Park, no relation to Jay, drew his weapon with practiced ease. "The decision is made. We'll find new leadership, better leadership." Adrian moved so fast that Sky didn't see him draw a mace. The first shot took Park in the chest before his weapon had fully cleared its holster. The second shot caught Kim in the throat as he lunged forward, surprise and blood blooming across his expensive shirt. Chen froze, his hand halfway to his own weapon, staring at Adrian with something that might have been respect or might have been terror. Adrian stood, his gun trained on Chen with rock-steady precision. "New rule," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who'd just executed 2 men without hesitation. "The financial strategist and her child are non-negotiable assets of this organization. Anyone who threatens them threatens me. Anyone who threatens me is already dead." Sky stepped forward, her heart hammering but her voice steady. She'd come too far to falter now. She pulled up one final screen, the master control interface for the frozen assets, all of Jay's seized accounts, all $2.3 billion of liquidity that she now controlled with a few keystrokes. You have a choice, she said to Chen, to the guards, to everyone watching this moment that would define everything that came after. Accept the new structure or die here. Adrian runs operations. I run strategy and finance. Ethan handles security. We modernize, we adapt, or we become extinct like every other organization that couldn't evolve. She let her hand rest on her stomach, a deliberate gesture. This child will inherit a stronger organization than the one you're clinging to. Survival isn't about tradition, it's about intelligence. And right now, I'm the smartest person in this room. Chen looked at the bodies on the floor. He looked at Adrian's unwavering gun. He looked at Sky, 7 months pregnant and wielding financial weapons that could destroy them all with a keystroke. Then, slowly, he sat back down. What are your terms? He asked. Adrian lowered his weapon. Complete operational restructuring, financial transparency within leadership, and my partner, he gestured to Sky, gets full council standing and 40% of recovered assets. Agreed, Chen said, and Sky heard the sound of an empire changing hands. Ethan found Jay in a storage facility in Incheon, 3 days after the council meeting. The man who'd ordered Adrian's death, who'd hunted them through the city with military precision, was hiding among shipping containers like a rat in the walls. There was a brief conversation, professional courtesy between men who understood violence, and then Ethan made it quick, clean, the kind of ending that left no loose threads, no future complications. He reported back to Adrian with characteristic brevity, contained. Adrian nodded once, understanding everything the word implied, and moved on to the next item on the restructuring agenda. There were 47 items total. Sky had made the list. 6 months later, the office overlooked the same financial district where Sky had once worked in her previous life, but from a higher floor, with better security, and under a name that appeared on no public records. The technology was cutting edge, triple encrypted networks, biometric access controls, financial software that she'd personally designed to be untraceable by conventional law enforcement methods. Sky sat in an ergonomic chair that Adrian had insisted on after she'd complained once, just once, about back pain, reviewing quarterly reports from their newly legitimized ventures. Shipping companies, real estate development, tech startups that laundered money so elegantly through actual innovation that even she sometimes forgot which profits were clean and which weren't. The baby, 3 months old now, named Maya after no one in particular because Sky wanted her daughter to have a name untethered from the past, slept in a bassinet near the desk. State-of-the-art monitoring equipment tracked her breathing, her heart rate, her temperature. Ethan had installed the system personally, along with enough security measures to protect a head of state. The Vancouver acquisition closes next week, Adrian said, entering without knocking because he never knocked anymore. Their partnership had evolved past such formalities. He crossed to the bassinet, looking down at Maya with an expression that still sometimes surprised Sky, something soft beneath the calculated exterior, something almost paternal. I saw the contracts, Sky replied, pulling up another screen. The profit margins are good, but the regulatory exposure is higher than I'd like. We should consider a subsidiary structure, maybe route it through the Singapore holding company first. Already done. Ethan suggested the same thing. Sky smiled. Ethan had been learning, absorbing financial strategy the same way he absorbed tactical situations, with focused intensity and frightening competence. He held the title of head of security, but in practice, he'd become something more. The bridge between Adrian's underworld instincts and Sky's corporate precision. She found him now in his usual position, standing near the window with sight lines to both entrances. A silent sentinel who'd expanded his protective radius to include not just Adrian, but Sky and Maya as well. The debt to Adrian had evolved into something more complex. Loyalty maybe, or the closest thing to family that any of them had left. She's growing fast, Ethan observed, his first words in 20 minutes. Too fast, Sky said, and was surprised by the emotion in her own voice. Maya had entered a world of violence and criminal enterprise, but she'd also entered a world of absolute security, unlimited resources, and 2 men who would burn cities to keep her safe. 3 men, she corrected herself, thinking of Ethan. Adrian moved to stand beside Sky's chair, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder, in a gesture that had become familiar over the months. Affection expressed through touch rather than words, intimacy built through shared survival rather than conventional courtship. "Do you ever think about that, Allie?" he asked quietly. "The phone you were looking for?" Sky did think about it. Often. That moment of desperation when she'd been searching for a discarded burner phone worth $2,000, pregnant and broke and convinced her life had reached its lowest possible point. She'd thought finding that phone would save her. Instead, she'd found something else entirely. "I think about how desperate I was," she said honestly. "How I thought $2,000 would solve my problems, how small my world had become. And now? Now she controlled financial operations for a criminal empire that was systematically legitimizing itself, making more money through corporate acquisitions than through traditional criminal enterprises. Now she had a daughter who would inherit wealth and power that Sky herself had never dreamed of. Now she had partners, because that's what Adrian and Ethan had become, who valued her mind more than her compliance, her strategy more than her subservience. "Now I understand that honest means would have left me destroyed," Sky said, looking out at the financial district spread below them like a glittering promise. "The system that ruined me, the legitimate one, the one with rules and laws and oversight, that system was never going to give me justice, it was never going to give me security, so I built my own." Adrian's hand tightened briefly on her shoulder. "We built it. Together." And that was the truth of it, Sky realized. Not one person's empire, but a collaboration. Adrian's connections and instincts, her financial brilliance and strategic vision, Ethan's tactical precision and unwavering loyalty. They were components of a machine that shouldn't work, that violated every conventional rule of organizational structure, but somehow functioned with brutal efficiency. A killer with honor, a disgraced genius with survival instincts, a soldier with an unpayable debt. And a baby who would grow up knowing that family wasn't about blood or legitimacy, but about the people who stood beside you when everything burned. Maya stirred in her bassinet, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon, hungry and demanding. Sky stood, her body remembering the rhythm of new motherhood, and Adrian stepped back to give her room. But he didn't leave, neither did Ethan. They stood together in the high-tech office overlooking the city. 3 people who'd found each other in violence and desperation, and somehow built something that resembled a future. It wasn't the future Sky had once imagined in her Wall Street days, when she'd believed in systems and justice, and playing by rules that turned out to be illusions. This future was darker, more complicated, built on foundations that would never bear scrutiny in daylight. But it was hers, theirs. And as Sky lifted Maya from the bassinet, feeling the weight of her daughter in her arms and the weight of her partner's presence at her back, she understood that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for in that alley. Not money, not survival, power, security, family, and the ruthless conviction that she'd do anything, break any rule, cross any line, to keep it. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of this story. Every view, every comment, every moment you spend here keeps these stories alive. If you felt this one, make sure to subscribe and let me know you watched to the end. Thank you so much for watching this story. If this video touched your heart even a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me keep creating stories that inspire, heal, and remind us that kindness still exists in this world.